and you're listening to the Jefferson Exchange. I'm producer Angela Decker. Here's My Better Half with host Vanessa Finney.
Welcome to My Better Half on the Jefferson Exchange. I'm Vanessa Finney. My guest today is doctor and vineyard owner Peter Adesman. While he was studying medicine as a young man, Peter was also learning about wine. Days spent training at OHSU were followed by nights and weekends at tasting rooms. And when he was 50, he finally planted a small-scale test vineyard. At age 60, he planted what is now Peter William Vineyard on a 10-acre hillside plot overlooking Medford. Peter and I talked about how he educated himself as an enophile and discovered the fellowship among wine lovers. Peter Adesman, welcome to My Better Half.
Well, thank you. Good to be here.
First of all, tell me about your day job, your primary profession.
Well, I've been a gastroenterologist since 1985 when I finished my training, initially in New York for about 6 years, and then returning back to Oregon because I trained here at OHSU in Portland, loved Oregon, thought I'd go back for family in New York, and then living in New York just wasn't for me. And so we moved my wife and kids back to Oregon.
What do you love about Southern Oregon in particular?
It rains less than Northern Oregon.
Sure.
And, I have an amazing situation. I live 6.5 minutes from work. I live on 17 acres. I have a vineyard there, and I have one stop sign and no traffic lights.
Oh,
you can't do that in Portland. You certainly can't do that in New York.
Definitely a more relaxed pace than either of those two places. So describe your familiarity with wines over the course of your life.
Well, my journey really started when my uncle at a Thanksgiving dinner back in the 70s opened up a couple of amazing Bordeaux's. My dad and mom drank wine with dinner, and going back to the 60s and early 70s, that was not typical in the United States. But they drank wine regularly. Unfortunately, it was usually pretty inexpensive wine, a lot of Portuguese reds that didn't cost very much money, and Bola Suave. But my uncle opened up some Bordeaux wines that were truly phenomenal, and I realized there's a lot to this and amazing pleasure out of having great wine.
There certainly is. So how did you go about educating yourself, other than the obvious, opening a lot of bottles?
It's the obvious, one bottle at a time. But tastings, that's really what it takes. You can't easily do this by just opening a bottle a night. I went to a lot of tastings, and when I was up in Portland from 1979 to 1985, I spent a lot of time at wine shops like Great Wine Buys, tasting every week, and as a formal tasting every week and informal tastings after my work at the university was done. So that really provided a lot. Wine trips down to Napa Valley, around to the Willamette Valley, and having friends that are interested in wine.
So part of it was just talking with other wine professionals, right? You hear their spiel as they pour, and maybe you pick their brains.
Right. We all are learning. There's always room to learn in the wine industry. You haven't tasted every wine. You haven't, experienced everything. So you kind of feed off of others.
So you mentioned the university just now, and you taught about wines for a while, correct?
Well, I didn't do formal teaching. I've done some teaching. For example, OSU has an extension out towards Jacksonville, and we did wine classes there as educational classes. We still do our third Thursday tastings. We've done wine seminars. I've turned a lot of people onto wines. I did wine lists for restaurants when I moved here, helped them out. So not as a business in terms of teaching, but yes, providing education.
Okay, and you've done some consulting for others.
Yes, indeed.
Are you a reader and a scholar by nature? So in addition to picking these professionals' brains, do you find yourself reading and doing research about the industry?
I do read about wines,
yeah.
But reading just doesn't get you there. You have to actually go experience the wine. So I've been very fortunate that we have a close group of guys that go on wine trips, since my wife has no interest in hearing about wine. She says, if I hear about more barrels anymore, I've had enough. I don't care about fermentation. I don't care about whether they're oak barrels from France or from Oregon or from California or anywhere else. That's not her thing. She drinks wine at dinner, but does not want to educate herself in the nuances of wine. So we take a boys' wine trip pretty much every other year to Europe, and we've been to Burgundy, Bordeaux, and Rhone, so 3 different trips there. We've been to Italy multiple times for Tuscany, Piedmont. We went to Sicily the last trip, as well as Campania. So you really learn when you spend time with the winemakers and taste their wines at the winery.
Sure, and Italy is such a gastronomical center to begin with. In addition
Fantastic
to wine.
place. What a wonderful place.
Do you have any good stories from one of those trips? Wine related.
Yeah. I can tell you one. So I was basically in Burgundy, and there's a restaurant there called Ma Cuisine. And we went in there, we tried calling them multiple times, and no one answered the phone to try to get a reservation. And I walk in there, and I found it at like 10 o'clock at night. The restaurant was just about closed. They had only one person in the back of the restaurant, maybe 10:30. And I spoke to the owner, and I said, do you have reservations for tomorrow? Could we get a reservation? He said, no, full. I said, how about the next night? No, full. And the woman from the corner, the only other person there, said, keep trying, work on them. And I said, where are you from? She goes, Boston. I said, what are you doing here? She said, my husband's into wine, and we're with one of the Kermit Lynch people. And I said, who's from Kermit Lynch? And she said, Dixon Brook. I said, I know Dixon. I've never met him, but I've bought thousands of dollars of wine from Dixon. So I said, where are they? They're in the cellar. So they come walking up, these two guys from the cellar. And I said, Dixon? He goes, yes. Peter Adesman. He goes, padesman@aol.com? That's how he remembered me. That's because he has sent me emails and, receipts of all the wine that I've purchased over the years.
So a surprise connection
It's
across
a small
the
world.
seas. It sure is.
Small world. And we see a lot of people that we've actually seen many times through multiple trips. One of the trips to Germany, and I've done multiple trips to the Mosel and Rheingau. We met a guy at a winery there, and we're driving around, and I said to my friend driving the car, I said, we need to make a stop. Harold lives right a block away. Let's go in there. So we knock on the door, and while I was saying hello, I said, I desperately need a bathroom. And that was our emergency bathroom stop. But we'd seen him several times and actually had dinner with him and his family in Medford when he traveled to Oregon.
Oh, that's wonderful. You can be mutual restroom stops for each
That's
other.
correct.
Yeah.
Yes, that's correct. We can reciprocate in that regard.
Well, you bring up a point that I was going to ask about. It is true in any community, it is a small world, even among different countries. Here in Southern Oregon, talk about the community of winemakers here, wine growers here. Do you find a fellowship?
Yes, there's definitely a fellowship. Like tonight, actually, there is actually a boys' dinner, a wine dinner, that will include probably, I think, 11 people at one of the local restaurants in Ashland, and it's all centered around Spanish wines. So you really learn a lot, and there'll be other winemakers there, including some that make my wine. Really, you're not competing against them, you're competing with them to put Southern Oregon on the map of any wine drinker.
Indeed. If you're just joining us, this is Vanessa Finney, host of My Better Half on the Jefferson Exchange. I'm talking with Peter Adesman about cultivating grapes and relationships in Southern Oregon.
Both are important.
What is your favorite thing about wine? And I know it's not going to necessarily be the alcohol, because I know from talking to you previously that one of your favorites of your own to drink is a low alcohol one, so you can enjoy it more.
Right.
Describe to somebody who doesn't get wine, what is it about it?
It's the nose of the wine, what it smells like. And I make this statement all the time at our Third Thursday tastings and at some other events that we do. It's more important to smell good than even taste good, because what you smell is what you taste.
Yeah.
And if you're not smelling very much, you're not tasting very much. So I think what really excites me is the nose of the wine and the perfume. We were at dinner with friends Saturday night, and I brought a bottle of Chardonnay made up north in the Willamette Valley, and the nose was amazing. So I made sure I didn't drink my last half a glass just so I can continue to smell it throughout the night.
Lovely. Tell me your timeline. When you first decided to plant, what made you think that you could make this leap from education and becoming, you were just an amateur aficionado for some period of time. Describe the moment when you realized you could actually get into the winemaking business, first of all.
Well, in my house that we had in the 90s, we had a 0.67 acres, and we planted a small vineyard just as a toy vineyard, and that was kind of fun. But then we decided, we really need to get into it, so we found a property on the east side of Medford. We thought that would be a fantastic property to grow grapes on. Right then, it had a bumper crop of poison oak and blackberries. So we had to rip all that out. We had the biggest cat in Southern Oregon come and just rip the soil and pull out all the roots. And we actually achieved that, which is really amazing. And I would say that was back when we started in 2012 to prep the land. 2013 is when we planted. But it's pretty exciting to see it. I mean, it gives me joy just to look out over the vineyard and the different phases.
Was it a big learning curve for you to go from learning about the nose and the taste and different wines to learning actually about the agriculture of it?
Yes, definitely. That part I really am learning still to this day. And some of the winemaking techniques. I knew about wine. I knew, obviously, varietals, what they should taste like, the aspects of their character. But growing the grapes, I mean, I can't say I was too smart. One of the things I did was I said, well, great vineyards make vines struggle. They have to work hard to produce great wine. So we're going to have dense planting like you frequently see in Europe, especially in Burgundy and France. And so we're going to plant the densest vineyard in southern Oregon, which is 6x9 spacing. Well, without getting too technical, I figured that was a one-time charge, planting that. But caring for twice the number of vines in that space doubles the cost of the vineyard. And so when I spoke to one of my winemakers the other day and I told him what we spent for 10 acres of vineyard and what the annual cost is, he said, really? I mean, it is incredibly expensive. So I wasn't that smart. I'm learning by mistakes as well as by positive input.
Sure. Talk about, what can you tell us about your own terroir?
We have what has been called a lot of clay, a black sticky. And so when it gets really wet, you can wear some of that home with you. It's really not bad for growing grapes. It holds on to water, which is good during the drought season. Water's a big problem. That we've had years where we've actually had to dry farm for most of the season because TID, Talent Irrigation District, had no water. Mm-hmm. And so they turned it off in June. Well, we need it more in July and August than we do in May and June. And so we basically had incredibly low yields, low production, good fruit, making great wine, but you can't break even with low production like that.
You mentioned the cost that it took you to plant so densely. Just to zoom out a bit, I understand it's not an uncommon story for somebody to get into winemaking in midlife, to make that shift. Is the expense in general somewhat prohibitive?
I think it is for a lot of people.
Yeah.
I mean, fortunately, I had a day job that allowed me to supplement all the costs, and I still do to this day. We're really not making money. We're throwing some of that back into the property itself. There are things that I'd like to do. For example, down at the barn, it's just gravel, and the gravel unfortunately gets eroded away. So we'd like to either chip seal or asphalt some of that area, but just more money. And it's not a money-making proposition. I guess from the IRS perspective, we're still a hobby farm.
Yeah. Is there anything you'd go back and tell yourself at the beginning of this new career? Were there any better choices you could have made knowing what you know now?
Possibly so. Well, everybody said, don't do it. You know, there's the joke in the industry that everybody knows, and how do you end up with a small fortune in the wine industry? And that start with a large one. That's why people that have some financial means can get into the industry. I mean, the payback takes years and years and years. First of all, you have to prep the land. Then you have to plant the grapes. And then for the first 3 years, you don't get any fruit. It's only on the third year that you start getting some fruit. So you have 2 years where nothing is produced and money keeps pouring into the vineyard. And for our little 10-acre vineyard, that's over $100,000 a year. Mm. So very expensive.
It's not exactly a get-rich-quick scheme, in other words. Yeah.
But what's interesting is not only, I mean, there are several physicians in the community that have created a little wine industry, a vineyard winery. One pretty large one, and that's Belfiore, is also physician-owned. But some of the winemakers have had careers that you would not have guessed. For example, one of my winemakers is an attorney that gave up law to make wine. Another winemaker that we've had in the past went to Harvard for graduate school and decided to change his career. So there's some very, very accomplished people working in the industry.
For the love of it.
For the love of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Peter Adesman of Peter William Vineyard. Thanks for talking with me today.
Oh, my pleasure. Great to be here.
You've been listening to My Better Half on the Jefferson Exchange. I'm Vanessa Finney. You can listen to more episodes at jeffexchange.org or wherever you get your podcasts.